What's up, everyone? My next guest of the Heart Speaks podcast is my friend Robert Wickers, who I met basically at a platform called ThinkSpot, one of the outfits of Jordan Peterson, actually, which is not fully up and running, but should be up and running at some time. But anyway, he was a producer on that project, and we became friends, and we decided to have him on the pod. And we talked a lot about Terrence Malick, my favorite film director, hence the title of this podcast. We talked about Paolo Sorrentino. We got into sort of their philosophies as film directors and, you know, a little bit of religion as well. I'm always into talking about the wisdom traditions. So we covered a lot of different cool things. For this particular podcast was really truly a riff in the musical sense of the word. So I hope you like it. I hope you'll share with your friends, and I hope you learn something from it. And as always, this is the Heart Speaks podcast. I'm your host, Chloe Valdary. Thanks for listening. What's up?
Not much. What's oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I don't even know how to finish my words. This is obviously going to be a deeply informal conversation.
No doubt.
Starting out from the get-go. What are these books you have behind you?
Gosh, what do we got here? Got Tropic of Cancer, Free Women, Free Men, Paglia. Got it, shout out the realist to ever do it. The Remains of the Day. These actually, somebody just gave these to me in bulk recently, so I'm just kind of sitting on like a. So
yeah, I feel like in Manhattan they would do it, but it would be like underground.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's got to have that air of mystique and exclusivity. So
like taboo-ness, whereas Brooklyn would be like out and about with it.
Yeah, there's some Eyes Wide Shut type shit going on in Manhattan for sure.
People keep referencing that movie. I've never seen that movie.
Oh damn! Yeah, I mean, go see it. It's a classic. It's like sadly very leaves.
Is it going to depress me? Like, am I going to be depressed?
No, I think it's more evocatively like disturbing, but you'll just be thinking about it for a time, which I think is the ultimate sort of a triumph of any film. But
that's true.
That's just me. I don't know. It might feel a little too real with previous happenstance and Epstein and so on and so forth. But it's up to you.
I've seen like the one clip where they're all in masks.
Yeah.
Show up at the party or whatever.
Yeah, my friend for Halloween, him and his fiance did an Eyes Wide Shut little cosplay, and it was like, dude, it's been like a year since that's feeling a little too fresh. But no, it's
damn
a good one. Check it out.
I feel like there's a bit of like Gnostic vibes in the whole Eyes Wide Shut Epstein. Like, I feel like there's a spectrum, and like, I don't actually know anything about Masonry. And for those of you who are listening who may be into it, I'm not interested in knowing anything about it. Let me tell you from the get-go. Like, I find it a little weird. But if I were to guess, is that there's a spectrum of Gnosticism. There's like Masonry on this end, and then there's like Eyes Wide Shut Epstein.
Yeah, and like the pipeline is a classic. But no, there's in San Francisco in particular, there's so many crazy illusions and randomly in the architecture, particularly around I think it's Nob Hill. But you'll just see all of a sudden like stonemason stuff and these sort of like inscriptions on a random wall, and everyone's just like, there's some sinister vibes going on in SF. Not, the least of which is like historically Gnostic, but yeah, crazy.
I know that there is a whole like side of Gnosticism that's cool and dope, but I think there's just been centuries of other stuff piled onto it. And my recent current obsession with Taoism and with like tantric Buddhism has made me very allergic to like
Interesting.
the whole masonry.
How so? What in what regard?
Because Taoism is like non-dualistic.
Mm.
It's like in Taoism and in versions of tantric Buddhism, they'll say like nirvana and samsara are the same things because it's non-dual. Whereas by the way, I don't know if any of these words are making sense. I apologize.
No, I love it. Yeah.
Whereas in certain aspects of Gnosticism, like everything is dualistic. Everything is like split. Everything is like there's the pure and the impure. There's the fallen world and the higher world. And like John Vervaeke has spoken about the fallout of that kind of way of thinking. And just on an individualistic level, it's very disintegrated. Like that sort of, there's pure and there's impure, like separation. And I find that it can become like, it can easily bleed onto schizophrenia and paranoia.
Yeah, that's interesting. That commentary on integration tends to be a theme that also runs through kind of like the German idealist strain, and also even like Heidegger's main beef with Descartes was essentially the dualism, the kind of like mind body and separation of soul as a complete distraction from the reality of obviously like the phenomenology of being and so on, and what like full integration looks like. So that seems to be sort of a running theme through all of these, like the archetypical mythos that Jung would posit. But that's really interesting. I haven't dipped into anything east of like Zoroastrianism, so I need to take a gander. But
you've only gone to Persia.
Yeah, exactly. The extent of Alexander's of empire. But yeah, got to keep it rolling. What like kind of sent you in that direction? I mean, you have some exposure to obviously Christianity, Judaism, and did you want to catch them all, or what was the?
Have you ever thought about your car personality? What's your vibe? Do you like the classic fully gas powered engine? Are you a best of both worlds type, driving on battery power while keeping gas on reserve just in case? Or are you more inclined to choose a convenient hybrid ride? Whichever your vibe, there's a Hyundai Tucson to match, and powertrain to get you there. Hyundai's 2023 Tucson lineup pairs the tech you want with sleek and stylish designs. They paid attention to all the details: the seats, the dash, the available panoramic roof. You name it, Hyundai thought of it. All while making sure each trim has enough room to hold space for your grocery runs, festival nights, and tailgates. Okay, Hyundai. When it comes to your journey, Hyundai is there for every mile. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more about the 2023 Hyundai Tucson. The 2023 Tucson plug-in hybrid is only sold in California, Colorado, Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Vermont. I love that. I love that question. So I saw that your favorite movie right now is A Hidden Life.
We're killing innocent people. Raiding other countries, preying on the weak. Now the priests call them heroes, even saints. The soldiers, the doers.
And by Terrence Malick, classic, my favorite. Everyone who knows me knows my favorite character. Shout out to Terrence Malick if you'd like to come on this pod.
Oh my goodness.
I would love to have you.
What a get.
But in 2020, I saw A Hidden Life in theaters, and in December of 2019.
Oh.
Before the storm.
Yeah, on the precipice.
On the precipice, I saw A Hidden Life. And it was the first movie where I came out of the theater. You know how you come out the movie theater and it's like, there can be this weird separation anxiety because you were like in the film and now you're like in the real world. Where A Hidden Life, I saw the film, I came out and it was like still with me. Like I wanted to. For those of you who may not know, A Hidden Life, let me just back up, is about this Austrian guy who protested against the Nazis. And by protest against the Nazis, I mean like the Nazis came to turn Austria into one of their outposts. And, he was this like Austrian farmer and his wife was like, we could just go escape into the woods. And this man made it a point of his being, like his very being became a protest.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't like hateful against the Nazis. He wasn't, bigoted against anyone who decided to become a Nazi, but he organized his life in such a way that his very being was a protest, that he refused to escape. He refused to like run away. He actively and consciously refused to become a Nazi. And he sort of like went all the way up into the ranks of the prison system, all the way up into Berlin until finally he was executed. But he made his entire life a kind of meditation in that sense. And that was the first film that made me seriously consider meditation. And so then 2020 descends upon us and I'm like, oh, I definitely need to meditate. So I started meditating, and then I discovered John Vervaeke's work, and his meditation contemplation practices are heavily influenced by both Socrates on the one hand and a lot of Buddhism, Vipassana Buddhism on the other hand. So that was like my foray into Buddhism. And then I was also reading like The Tao of Pooh, which is about how Winnie the Pooh is like a Taoist character.
I love it.
And so like slowly but surely as I progressed through my practice, I started like being intrigued by Taoism, by Tantra, which is about the transmutation of emotion. So it actually started with Terrence Malick.
Wow, there we go. Full circle. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. That's so interesting what you said about also the kind of like re-entry into the world after you're in the theater. Yeah. And I think that is, I feel like that's a conscious litmus test for Malick, is like the success of his films hinge upon or contingent upon the individual, like in that kind of like crossing of the plane from theater, just total solemnity, immersion, like meditation as his films are, back into the world where you're just sort of like thrown by it. Yeah. And again, like that's again a little on the nose, like the concept of thrownness that Heidegger talks about. That and Malick was like a Heideggerian scholar. He taught philosophy.
Oh, was he?
He taught philosophy at MIT. He was at Harvard, studied under I think a famous actually film philosophy theorist, and then he went to Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship.
Of course,
left early after his dissertation was rejected. Came back, taught at MIT, and I think he actually translated some of Heidegger's later works and met him actually. But the idea, so he's in just an insane life that very casually strewn across like multiple disciplines that obviously end up all being integrated. But I think that moment when you come out of the theater is very consciously like, have I achieved the receiver feeling that thrownness going back to the world? And I think that even for someone like myself who didn't see it in theaters, that moment of like, oh my gosh, you're now outside and you are fully conscious in a way that I think you didn't realize while or before you were watching the film. But that's when I think he's really he's found his form or is back to it, because I think he thrives with historical set pieces, particularly because it's all about creating a kind of presence in an absence, like a world that very much we know and are conscious of not existing, but the degree to which he can cohere this all together, like sensually, creates a sense of like being in presence that is, then translates to this like, oh my gosh, I emerged from the theater and it's just, it hits you, but this is also just one of the most evocative, films I've seen in years, but which is to me just the very simple test for quality for film for me. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I saw many of his other films. I was first struck by Tree of Life. I don't actually remember the first time I saw it because I've seen it multiple times now. But I saw it, and I wish I could remember like the context in which I saw it, but it just impacted me so deeply. And I feel like A Hidden Life was sort of his, I mean, not to say that he can't do even greater than A Hidden Life, but like, I feel like that's the apex, that's the standard, because it combined his very, not whimsical isn't the right word actually, his almost water-like approach to cinematography, and also to like an acting method with actual historical events. And so I think that is what enabled the almost like a calling to emerge, because when I saw that film, after I saw that film, I felt like I was being asked, like, this is the standard. Are you living up to it? Like in your lived experience, like this is the standard of a person whose character was resolute, who had to bear the suffering of his persecution, right? And did so with not just a kind of conviction, but also like grace towards the people who were persecuting him. And I love that Terrence Malick did this about this particular subject, because I often hear, you know, yes, I can understand how a Dr. King might, you know, practice nonviolence towards racists in America, but certainly not the Nazis. We would never do it for the Nazis. And like you see like this guy doing it in his small way, but in a very impactful and profound way. And it was just such a beautiful film. I didn't know that Malick was a student of Heidegger. I have a number of texts by Heidegger that I have not read because I'm just so intimidated by by his work. I'm curious if you would advise like starting with any one treatise by Heidegger.
I think you got to dive right in on, being in time, but it has to be accompanied by, I think, readers. I keep it super surface level and don't try and have the hubris to think I can take that on in and of itself, but just to be in it and then have something accompanying. I'll even just do something as simple as like, Googling, the concepts that you see, and then you'll have like, because there are people just dedicated to like paragraphs of, you know what I mean? And so you kind of have to break it down. And in no way do I feel like I will, finish it, or even like that's the goal. It's just like, what can I take out? And a lot of it's great because like the more you watch Malick as well, the more you kind of just have the impetus to dive back in and have some referential, stuff there. But no, I think the fascinating thing about Malick as well is that he, like, obviously there's a sense of ambition that you feel in the film, just the way it's shot, the like, kind of transcendental cinematography, and the concept of like, the camera as spirit and what that sort of implies. But he also, if that's not enough, of a challenge, he's looking to more and more with each of his films, I think, embrace like the Christian allegory, and sort of like the archetypical Christ, or like in Knight of Cups, like the story of Job, which you so rightly pointed out to me after watching that. But in this case, he gets very explicit when it comes to like the judge as sort of like a Pontius Pilate figure. The two, fellow prisoners who were executed next to him as like the two thieves besides Christ, or criminals besides Christ, one hardened, one kind of like one softened. So there are all these very explicit allusions, but yet it somehow doesn't feel, like contrived or exactly. Which I think is an incredible achievement in and of itself. But also I noticed that the film criticism community, for some reason, seems to refuse to engage with the spiritual or Christian elements of the film, perhaps unsurprisingly. But there's like almost an unwillingness, like a cynicism of like, we're not going to take the bait on this level because it's so imbued with these kind of fraught, I don't know,
do you think
polarizing concepts.
Do you think that's what it is?
It's either like these people are much brighter than myself and are way better versed in film across the board, but they're like is very consistently this inability to do so. And the cynical view is like there is this conscious decision or like this mandate editorially or something, but it's also possible that they're just like the certain wavelength that people are on with Malick. They're kind of either on it or not. And maybe it is sort of just like a willingness to give yourself up to sort of like a spiritual experience. And maybe some people that's just not part of, their interests naturally or instinctually. So I don't know. Not that one is better than the other or whatever, but I find it interesting,
I know that the actors at Cannes Film Festival got like a ridiculous standing ovation, in terms of like how long it lasted. And yeah, that's striking that like the response to Malick's films, and in particular this last film, is overwhelming praise and appreciation. And yet I wonder how much that translates into that feeling of a calling, because that's what I felt when I was watching it. But I suspect, just knowing my own ego and projecting it out onto others for a second, I suspect that the reason for this hesitation to spiritual life is basically like, you have to like carry the weight if you're going to do it. You know, you have to like really be willing to, you know, to take a Christian sort of parable to like, you know, leave all your riches behind and like bear the burden of immersing yourself in that entirely new and different paradigm. And I think that there's obviously rewards and gifts and beauty that comes with that, but it is deeply terrifying actually to like sort of before you make the leap, and even while you're falling, it's deeply terrifying. And I suspect that hesitation is present because that hesitation is within me, so I can see it being present within other people as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that's probably a pretty fair assessment, considering that like this is not, you know, the I don't know, media class is perhaps not best known for their, you know, equanimous like you know, takes and you know, so on, or willingness to just kind of give themselves over to somebody's full vision that speaks to maybe a time before we know as modernity and like the contemporary era as it relates to spirituality. But yeah, I don't know. It is fascinating. Like I saw Richard Brody like got really caught up, and I think he's just been I kind of give a pass to because he's been so traumatized by Nazi films as a framework to project somebody's like very simple and one-dimensional, you know, view of the world, and how that can like be extrapolated to some sort of pet cause. So he was just sort of like, God damn it, like stop doing these Nazi films, etc. And missing the point entirely. But then there's somebody like Mark Kermode who is sees, I don't know, Malick's techniques as like very indulgent, which I find, which is something you hear, you know, very self-indulgent, you hear constantly about Malick, but it seems a little bit of a empty take just because everything is so distilled in Malick's films, despite the fact that it can feel like, if you look at any sort of shot without context, you could see, okay, well, like what is going on here? But pieced together, the entire composition is like an utter distillation of majorly ambitious concepts that end up kind of striking home where he intends to. So, yeah, just, I don't know, it just speaks to a sort of like intangible that he brings that it just is not maybe as accessible as I would think. But I don't know.
I like to contrast Malick with Paulo Sorrentino's work because when I think of indulgence, deliberately so.
Sure. It's in like the Italian tradition, right?
Exactly. Like, and it's sort of like I love Sorrentino's work as a kind of ode to indulgence. Have you seen The Young Pope?
Yeah, so I've seen the first season.
Okay.
The Young Pope is I need to catch up.
You
on
have to see, especially John Malkovich. The second season, I didn't even know it was possible to like. I mean, obviously the first season was amazing, but like the second season is like spectacular.
Elevate, yeah.
It's it's a commentary on like fascism and extremism within the context of the Catholic Church. It's a commentary on the sort of inclination, and this is also seen in like the Dark Knight and the Batman series in general, but sort of inclination to dismiss the rich. And it's like the fact that he was able to do all of these things in one season was just, you have to watch it, and then we have to talk about it because it's incredible. Absolutely.
No, I love any excuse to dive back in. That's something I've definitely overlooked. But I just watched in The Hand of God, which was his recent more like personal work, autobiographically. Yeah, so he just kind of almost a loosely fictionalized account of his life growing up in Naples, and it's certainly in the same vein. For me, not as resonant, but beautifully shot. I don't know if that style of story suits him, whereas he's more of just a kind of composer of just incredible set pieces and kind of like the existentialist aspect, which there are elements of in this, but like the great beauty for me is the ultimate, is kind of the apex of his work. To me is, I was just in Rome, so I did like a little personal tour around some of the shots, and like Rome in particular really does invoke this sense of like wonder, but also like existential dread, just from the sense of like history and sheer beauty that exists, and just sort of the like how palpable it is. I found myself like coming back to New York and just being like, in the same way you come out of the theater, it's like I need to like take 2 days to just kind of process this. But which is a great reference to the film when the tourist dies, upon seeing the kind of vista. It's like, it's striking. It all sounds so like overwrought and kind of indulgent, but I think it's kind of fair. But
I had literally existential dread is the perfect description of my experience of Rome. I like the first few days, I was there for like 5 days in 2015. And the first 2 days I was just like astounded by the beauty. And then the last few days I was depressed. because it was like the history before you. It was essentially a kind of that moment in Job where God is like, can you draw out Leviathan with a hook? Like when after Job complains to God, and God is like, can you measure the depths of the sea? Can you like, that was my experience in Rome. And I had to like do some serious meditation and deep study of certain texts, some texts I came across to sort of pull me out of it. But another water reference is coming up for me with Rome. It's like it was almost like I was drowning in the depths of so much eros. And it's interesting because Carl Jung refused to go to Rome because he knew.
Really?
He knew he wouldn't
make it out of there alive. Yeah. That's wild. Yeah,
isn't that wild?
That
like of
crazy.
All people, like Jung was like, nope.
Yeah,
it's a no for me.
I think it's Sorrentino was also brilliant to juxtapose that concept of just the scope of time and grandiosity of Rome, and in every sense, from like civilizational to artistic, etc. And then the idea of kind of like cultural and societal scleroticism that like I think Italians generally have felt for some time now, like especially you talk about the recent election, really low turnout, etc. There's just not a lot of like civic engagement. You kind of have like an encroaching EU when it comes to sort of like neoliberal political economic policies and so on, and just sort of this kind of sense of malaise. And the friend who I was with really was like, that was sort of the theme for him, was this kind of like sense of malaise, and that comes to life in sort of like pomposity that one of the women puts forth, this kind of like insecure overcompensation of like all the works that she's achieved, etc. And they're sitting right over the Colosseum, and obviously and Jep, the main character, who's supposedly created this like transcendent work of fiction when he was early and then never worked again, is just sort of like, look where you are and like who you're amongst. Like we're all struggling and living sort of like suffering, desperate lives, and the best thing you can do is just like have solidarity and at least recognize suffering in each other and kind of elevate that transcendent experience. But that's that could very much be transposed onto certain milieus in the US as well. But
the US doesn't have that same grandiosity in terms of its history. I mean,
for sure.
And that is both a blessing and a curse in many ways. Yeah. It sort of stunts our imagination. It impoverishes our sense of perception. Like there is no grand Colosseum. Now, presumably we could build it, but that takes an incredible amount of vision and I mean insight that I don't know that I think we're potentially up to the task, but
yeah, I mean, I I almost would even argue that we're failing the very little, kind of timeline that we have had historically, in the sense that like there's no past anymore in the US in the way to which we've been captured by, this just like hyper reactive cycle of media and memes and just general deluge of information. Like there's just the ever present, and that sort of has this like dislocating effect, which I think is like you see rejections of more so in somewhere like Italy or of course Europe, and that's not a novel take by any means, but I do think that's like a conscious sort of appreciation for tradition, or at least nod to it, of like we understand that the test of time has not been proven with regard to these sort of like mediums or pieces of technology that are sort of dislocating us now, and for what, and therefore like fuck off. But I think one of the most like on that note depressing things for whatever reason was seeing the Lime scooters being I don't know why, like it's incredibly petty and like, but it just felt and it has an element of just like romanticization of the world that doesn't exist based on like my weird kind of interior conception of it. But it's also like that just feels wrong, the same way that like seeing for whatever reason like a phone or computer in a film just feels wrong, because I think there's
a cell phone.
There's just like this reflexive human rejection of it. And maybe it's just me, but whenever I see it, it just never has worked. And there are great filmmakers who have tried to like tackle the contemporary era, but whenever like the phone or the screen becomes even like an ornament, and it just feels wrong. I don't know.
Succession has done that, I've noticed, or they tried to do it. But I think that works for Succession because the story is just about dysfunction. It's
so sexless and smooth and just like, exactly. Yeah. It's just shiny, smooth surfaces, and then just like, and then internal dysfunction. Totally. Yeah.
So it actually works if the piece is about a kind of bitter, almost anemic, like experience.
If that tonal like atmosphere is set, I think, which is also really difficult to do. Like that might be one of the few it's pouring outside. That might be one of the few examples of that being done successfully. But like I see, I don't know, like I feel like the Nordic filmmakers these days are very much into like social commentary. And like I saw The Triangle of Sadness last night, which is won the Palme d'Or this year, and essentially it was a screening, and the director was talking about it being about beauty as currency and sort of like influencers and so on. And like it's actually like one of the greatest scenes of 2022 in the middle of this film, without a doubt, just an absolute crescendo that's like orchestrated magnificently. But it's also like, to me, these types of films are held back by their own referentiality to kind of the contemporary era when it comes to technology and so on. But I don't know. That's just me.
It's interesting you say the referentiality. In this book I recently read about Vajrayana Buddhism, the whole point is to get rid of all references, meaning we cling to references as a kind of security. And obviously this challenges the whole sort of grandiosity of the past that we were just talking about as a reference in and of itself. But its challenge is to be in the present, not in the sense of presentism, right, which I think is what you're referring to, but in the ever-present sort of pre-fall in the Garden of Eden type of presence, where speaking of another Malick film, it's sort of like The New World.
Oh yeah.
Right? It's like Pocahontas in The New World. Oh. It's like that way of being. That's what I mean by absence of referentiality. And I think that's what this text is getting at. And it's so beautiful. And every time I see that movie, I'm like, that's who I want to be. Like, that's what I want to embody. Like,
absolutely.
It's such fierce grace in that sort of absence of referencing, of constantly need to referencing. And it doesn't translate as a sort of disrespect of the past or of a disregard for the past. It's almost as if the past is always present anyway, like as a given.
Yeah.
And And like if there was ever an archetype of who I wanted to become or what I wanted to embody, it would be Pocahontas in the New World.
I remember, I mean, it's very interesting that he chooses kind of like Pocahontas as the vessel to perhaps manifest this sense of like fully integratedness and with regard to that same connection to the scope of time and everything that has been, which is like a constant Malick theme, like Tree of Life. You have like the cosmos at the beginning of the film. And so, but just like the notion of eternity and what that means from obviously a perspective of like personal reference and your own existence, but also to what that means for the world around you and the people around you. Hence the references to nature constantly, the interstitial kind of shots that may seem random but are actually very intentional. And one thing I realized that he did that I hadn't totally grasped until A Hidden Life is like obviously any sort of allusions to Christ or the sacred and so on have these implications of eternity. But the way that the edits are made or the cuts with individual scenes that appear that they've been shot at different times but are in the same location or similar, or one scene that is shot in different locations but is continuing a thread of the same conversation, I think is sort of a technique he uses to try and project the notion of eternity and the sense that these things live through time, not necessarily in the linear sense of like moment to moment as we perceive them. That's what I thought he was trying to do there, but I might just be reading into it, but I found that really interesting. Like that's something he does in each of his films from like Thin Red Line on to A Hidden Life. And it's super effective in my opinion. It gives you this sense of just, you're tapping into a holistic experience that's fully integrated,
Yeah. It's so beautiful. Again, Terrence Malick, if you want to.
The goat. He is the goat. One thing I also, the last thing maybe before I start going down too much of a rabbit hole on Malick is like the one thing I love about Hidden Life's just more kind of like pure film, messaging 101, et cetera, is like the anti-utilitarian messaging of this to a certain degree, because like we're now entering a period where, the certain, I don't know, masters of the universe as we see it today, amongst, let's say, like the tech set and so on.
Tech gods.
Exactly, like effective altruism.
Promethean folks who didn't understand the story of Prometheus.
Yes, exactly. The transhumanists of the world who fascinatingly separation of mind and body and so on, and a total rejection of what, probably.
And it's also, by the way, I just have to tell you, the more I read like Taoism, there's these texts that come up that talk about nakedness in the philosophical sense. And I'm realizing there's this through line between, sort of Judeo-Christian Book of Genesis, who told you that you were naked question that God asks Adam and Eve. There's a through line between that and like the Taoist calling to enter into philosophical nakedness or nakedness as a kind of being, as a kind of Pocahontas-esque sort of way of being.
Sure.
And the utilitarian contrast with that is sort of like, when I think of the utilitarian tech bro contrast, I think of the moment in the myth when Adam and Eve like hide from God because they're ashamed, and it's all automatically this like dualistic separation. You've separated yourself from God. Like you don't understand you don't even comprehend the oneness, which is why, which I think is why God asks, who told you that you were naked, right? Like, what is this sort of like separation happening? And I think that the utilitarian mindset is like in pursuit of control, because ultimately it's afraid of what we're all afraid of, which is death.
And existential insecurity and legacy, and this sense of like what now these kind of like effective altruists are trumpeting is this idea of like our singular focus should be to maximize the potential of like humans' existence through millennia, meaning we transcend Earth, we move to Mars, like we make sacrifices.
Shout out to Elon.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Listen, no, I mean, this is not one of these kind of like, cynical leftist denigrations that you see where it's like, oh, to the gulag. But like like at the same degree, like we need to maximize, things for the future, like future generations, which is, I can understand the appeal, and it sort of reeks of almost like a somewhat contrived, little too pointed idea that works for the optics. But it's there's a world now that is just completely being neglected as a function of that mindset. And so anyway, Malick is perhaps the antithesis of that, and I think it should be required viewing his entire filmography for the Fang, every Fang employee. But yeah, the one last thing is that what totally reminds me of what you're saying about that kind of separation is, in the film there's his like buddy in prison who he reunites with, who is played by a fantastic actor. I'm forgetting his name. I think it's Frank Rogowski, but he's sensational. Go see Transit, see Victoria, both awesome. He features prominently, but he talks about when you are executed, it's by guillotine, which I thought that was just going to be a device used in the film, but they actually, which is just like, of course, but but he talks about when this dream of your head is separated from your body, and you're still present within your body, and you reach up and take your head and place it back on, and like the sense of like transcendence through death, but also like there is no separation. These two sacred figures sort of like expressing this particular, I don't know, kind of sensibility is interesting, and certainly Malickian. So
I will have to check out this other film that you just mentioned.
Oh yeah, definitely check out Transit's great. Victoria, I think, is fantastic. Some people think it's gimmicky because it's one take. But they shot it all in one take, which is an insane achievement of itself. But it's actually like very, very good, very well written, and also captures, I think, for me, most accurately of any film that I've seen so far, just the I don't know, the zeitgeist of like Berlin, in terms of the techno, the history, just kind of the grittiness, so on. But anyway,
I'm actually seeing a friend tonight from Berlin.
Oh, no way.
I'll ask her if she's seen some of these films.
Yeah.
So you have any particular forecasts for whether or not we as a species are gonna get our shit together? I was just talking with a friend and a mentor about this. I look at what Elon's doing, and part of me is like, ambition. I see you. You want to save humans by going outward, basically, by like exploring the external terrain of the cosmos. I salute the desire to want to further the species. I think that's a basic desire. Sure. However, I think that the way to do it is not by sort of colonizing Mars, not by exploring territory outside of ourselves, but actually exploring territory within, which is something that, I mean, you could argue has happened in certain epics of Western history, certainly like, Socrates and, Aurelius and all these figures, and, a little bit of Gnosticism, a little bit of Christianity, all these things have been forays into the searching of the human soul, but never in a decentralized way while simultaneously being at scale.
Yeah.
And like, that's the puzzle that I'm interested in unlocking.
Do you think there are any kind of like coherent antagonists to the kind of transhumanistic view that exists in the mainstream? Is there any sort of like vehicle through which this manifests or emerges, or is it just kind of like the people on Twitter just in the replies going in on Elon and so on? Like,
it's
where?
Definitely not that.
What's the front line?
So what I realized about Theory of Enchantment is what I'm ultimately seeking to do is building a kind of video game that has external and internal components that will scale human healing.
Wow.
I realized that a few weeks ago, like that's what I'm trying to do. And every iteration of it is just that. It's an iteration of it for the next version and the next version and the next version. And like anti-racism is like one portal into, because I think what our collective society's desire for anti-racism programs reveals is actually a deep and abiding hunger for wholeness. And a lot of the kind of really subpar programs out there are just reflections of our lack of wholeness. But the desire for it is like, we are hungry for it. And I'm realizing that like the anti-racism piece is just one piece of a larger sort of, I don't know what it'll be, but like of a larger suite of practices whose goal is to scale human healing.
Yeah. And when you say scale, what are the access points that you find are most effective or you think will be, educationally through corporations, schools, communities?
Yeah.
Like what is your vision on that front?
So I think it has to a certain extent, go through already pre-established groups. So when companies are interested in anti-racism practices, like that's one, group model. Schools, that's another group model. The problem with that, or the challenge with that, is I think you have to go in and figure out what some of their practices already are and build something that's complementary to their system. Not all aspects of their system, but some aspects of their system, because it's got to be indigenous to their system. Otherwise, it won't like stick. Sure. But also on this sort of quasi-individual level, I want to create a video game that like rivals like Assassin's Creed.
In what way?
So I saw my friend playing this video game the other day, and I'd never seen it before. And they like go to ancient Greece.
Yeah.
and like
you're in the Vatican, and then like
and I love the way they pronounce his name, and I'm going to start pronouncing his name in this way. There's like quests where they have to like, I played one episode of this where they have to like go talk to Socrates, right? And like rescue Socrates from whatever. Right. And I'm like, I'm sitting here watching my friend play this game, and I'm like, what? Wait a minute. Why don't we design a game? This is just like the first thing that fired off in my head. What if we designed a game where like you could go to ancient Greece and study Stoicism, like for real,
right? Yeah.
Right? Like where you could go to ancient Israel and study peoplehood, where you could go to ancient China and study Taoism. Like, and there would be the individual component where you're sort of sitting on your sofa playing the game, but there would also be the group component where you have to like go and meet with other people, let's say, that are trying to master the elements. I'm going to throw in an Avatar: The Last Airbender reference.
Oh yeah.
Trying to master all the elements and become king, become queen. And one of the quests is you have to go do. One of the quests is not simply in sort of Pokemon Go-esque where you have to go do something with these other people. The quest, I'm just realizing this right now out loud. The quest is you actually have to build community.
Yeah.
With those other people who are also trying to become kings and queens, because the community will be the container that sustains the new embodied practice along the way. So I have a lot of like energy within me moving toward this idea, and everything that I build in Theory of Enchantment is going to like iterate on this idea in the same way that everything that Elon Musk, or many of the things that Elon Musk has built, were just iterative versions of what came before.
Yeah, what I love about that is the sense of like creating, again, I guess like pulling back themes from earlier, like the feeling of presentness in time as a whole, as a scope, and your connection to history, obviously, and like the groundedness that provides, and a sort of like existential reckoning that implies, that I think is super healthy. And that intuition that you have for that is, I think, pays dividends for sure. But yeah, anything that's going to be fostering community building is going to be such a premium, I think, going forward as we start to realize sort of the deleterious effects of a lot of modernity when it comes to community. I mean, we already have, reaped what we've sowed quite a bit. So yeah, that is an antidote that I'm all for. That's super cool. But I like that you're having these continuous revelations and kind of building on the foundation that you've set from years prior, and it's still growing and like responsive to your experience around you. So that's super cool.
Yeah, I'm a little like I have to keep being humble because it's like, but can we do it? Like, because it seems like a lot of things are crumbling around us.
Yeah. I know. Well, that's the one question I have is like, do you have to place, like really enduring faith in the institutions that we have currently, whether private or public or local or national, et cetera, to believe that like what you've created can be fostered properly and administered properly and like proliferate throughout that? Like almost if it works, it has to like unravel some of these institutes. You know what I mean? Like it has to strike at the heart of what, I don't know. That's something that I find that like, that's great. As if there's any sort of reckoning that's occurring on whatever sort of level, that's fantastic. But like, for there to be like massive resonance, it almost has to undermine what's existing.
For sure. And this is a great like shout out to the people who say you have to tear down the system. Like I think that sometimes they're off in terms of like their vision, but I appreciate that challenge. I appreciate hearing that challenge. I'm sitting with this metaphor that comes from Israel. Like the name Israel means to wrestle. So I'm sitting with that metaphor, and I'm also sitting with, someone said on my Twitter recently that the word telos is actually like an Indo-European word that means more like of what we think of when we think of similar to wrestling, like sort of a dwelling, and which is a constant emotive experience, a constantly moving, energy moving experience, as opposed to purpose in the kind of Promethean sense. I think, which I think is how we think of purpose societally, sort of progressive, like inevitable progressiveness. And I think in that sense, the Taoist conception, and I've seen this, I'm mixing up Taoism and Buddhism. I apologize to those of you who care. But in Vajrayana Buddhism, there's this thread, which I mentioned earlier, which is like enlightenment and non-enlightenment are the same things. Like samsara and nirvana are the same things. It's non-dual, right? Even in the book of Isaiah, God says, "Behold, I create light and dark, good and evil. I alone do this." Right? So there's like a non-dual thread that I think I'm hypothesizing can be used, if actualized, to transform the sort of like bureaucratic at best, utilitarian at worst organizations that you're speaking about. Because you can, in a lot of the Buddhist literature I've been reading, there's like they're saying like all of these dysfunctional ways of being are forms of enlightenment, just in distorted form. So that idea really like delights me on some level, and I'm way more attracted to that idea than I am to like ideas of Gnosticism that we talked about earlier. So I don't know, like this is all like philosophical, but that something chimes in me when I hear that that phrasing.
I think it leaves the opportunity for like actionability in a way that something like Gnosticism is so many layers away from like the concept of maybe groundedness or like being in the world and so on. But I mean it's as desperately needed now as ever. I think, we're at an inflection point and continue to be at one, and like this just not sustainable any longer.
Mhm.
So I hope that, to some degree there is like this submission to that concept within some of these institutions. And even if it's one or two, and bottom up or top down, I think like that's a huge, huge victory, because there is also this idea of like, what can one instance really affect, and it's like, well, that's very much at the heart of like anything we do every day. And like you either make an extremely nihilistic decision and everything unravels, or there's some sort of like dignity in that idea. So I say get in there. No.
Beautifully said. Yeah, I saw Avatar: The Last Airbender 3 years ago, and I was like, oh, this is true. This
just
is like
straight facts.
Fundamentally true. I want to be an Avatar. Like I want to be Pocahontas. I want to be an Avatar.
Yeah.
I want to be all these things.
You want to be Malick, Pocahontas. You want to be
like
Avatar.
If all three like were an amalgamation.
Totally.
I would fuck with that. That would be so
absolutely
cool.
Absolutely.
Do you want to hype or peep anything that you're into right now for the interwebs?
Damn. Yeah, let's see. Something that just like anything I'm enjoying on the interwebs. Yeah. There's a couple Substacks. Let's see. There's Adam Lair, who's local New York artist, has a Substack called Safety Propaganda. Has a really rich compendium of kind of like artistic references that are relatively subversive, and I think needed in that regard for this moment when it comes to art and culture. He's great. And then, gosh, what else? That's the only one I have off the top of my head right now. But yeah, okay. What about you?
Well, all the things I mentioned in this pod, definitely like vibrating on. I would encourage people to take up some set of practices like that gets you in sort of like right relationship with yourself and the environment you're in. I do, meditation, contemplation practices, and I'm constantly sort of like upgrading them or updating them based upon like new stuff I'm reading. But I also just started taking motorcycle lessons, and
no way.
Yeah, and I'm like terrible at it, but I'm like getting better, every step of the way. And I actually took a motorcycle lesson this weekend.
Oh yeah, it was like street bike.
It was like a smaller bike.
For the street or for like a dirt bike? Like street,
for the
right?
Street, for the street. Okay, yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
And it was so fun. And I love learning it because it teaches you that coherence that we're talking about. Like that's a very simple example of cohering with your environment and your environment cohering with you in a way that requires a kind of inner harmony. Because if not, you might die, right? It's like it's like rain wet, as my friend likes to say. It's like so I would just encourage people to try to get into alignment and model that for others. Whatever
your steed may be, whether by horse or by motorcycle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And also, if you're interested in helping me design this video game, let me know. Like,
get in the chat.
I'm doing that scene from Lord of the Rings where they like they light the fire on the mountain and then
and then they're all
and then they're all lit. So if you want to get lit with me,
let's go. Have you, not to go off this, but have you seen the new Lord of the Rings?
I'm not completely up to date. I've only seen the first 3 episodes.
Got it. Yeah, I had rock bottom expectations, but I find it palatable enough to watch. I think I'm just like rock very bottom. Simple. Yeah. I mean, like it's insane. Like what they've done with $1 billion. It's almost like. Do you know Tim and Eric? Do you ever know?
No.
It's like it was a sketch show. Tim Heidecker with Eric Wareheim. But anyway, they made this movie called Tim and Eric's $1 Billion Movie, and there's a scene. They just create like a 2-minute video with Johnny Depp, but they cast the wrong Johnny Depp, etc. And like their financier paid $1 billion for it, and he's like, I paid $1 billion for this piece of shit. Like, that's kind of what was going through my mind watching the pilot. But I realized, like, if I just see orcs, like, I'm just satisfied. I'm like, all right, let's do it. I will watch.
That's
like,
it.
Absolutely needs met. So
that's it.
But yeah, whatever.
I just started reading Lord of the Rings. I'm like trudging through it slowly but surely. I'm like, I gotta do it. I cannot truly call myself a fan of the universe if I haven't read it. I know that deep down. As much as it pains me to say it, but
no, it's the best.
Just trucking through. I also was saying this recently to a friend. Another example of perhaps proof that our collective unconscious is like craving this sort of adventure time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This wellspring of films and movies and TV shows that are all about like ancient or real or fantasy ancient worlds where like people are like going on adventures and people are figuring out what does it mean to become king? What does it mean to become queen? What does it mean to govern? What is required to govern? Right? Yeah. You see this in like Viking shows, and which I'm obsessed with, by the way. You see this in like, The Last Kingdom. You see this with Lord of the Rings. You see this with what's the Game of Thrones spinoff?
House of the Dragon.
Like this archetypal, like, and I'm like, we're gonna put that in the video game.
What's so funny? That's such a great point. Is how like people are just like thirsting for these like very first principle concepts about like civic, just like robustness. And it would be so funny if like Netflix is sitting there like on their like writing by committee via what the algorithm is saying, and they're just pumping out all this actually value that just saves like we doubted Netflix, but they actually like inadvertently restructured and reordered everything. But that's a great point. That's so true. It's something I've not even realized, but absolutely true.
That's such a great framing too, because it's like the algorithm picks up on humans, right? That's right. Like
the worst, but this is like the silver lining that nobody's talking about that maybe is making all the difference.
It's like it's right there. You know that what is it, a Geico commercial, I think, where there's a fisherman and he's holding a fishing line and there's a fish at the end of it. And he's like trying to coax the person to get it. And he goes, "Ooh, you almost got it. Ooh, you almost got it."
He's just dangling.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
I feel like that's where we are with the algorithm. It's like,
it's so close.
It's so close.
Come on,
everybody.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know.
We'll see.
Indeed.
We'll have to like midwife it into existence.
Yeah, exactly. But
before we go, because we are at an hour, why don't I realized I forgot to do this. Can you tell us who you are?
Oh yeah, sorry. I'm Robert Wickers, friend of Chloe. No, we met through ThinkSpot, which is a little endeavor, a little project we're working on that came apart at the seams, but is going to be back hopefully in a couple months in a kind of redesigned, more low-key manner. So feel free to check that out in like 2-3 months. And then otherwise, I'm just I'm hanging out in Brooklyn and hanging out with Chloe and just doing my thing. Yeah.
Awesome. And that's a Jordan Peterson outfit, right? ThinkSpot?
It is.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thanks for coming out on the pod.
Thank you so much for having me. It's super fun.
Bye.